Hi, folks. Denise Howell here. Next up is This Week in Law. And if you like porn and drinking, we've got the show for you. We're going to talk about the adverse impacts of internet porn, but whether law or regulation is really the solution. We're going to talk about Ali Spagnola's Power Hour lawsuit and learn all about the game, too. Rob Peguerero's with us as well. You've got to join us next on This Week in Law.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for This Week in Law is provided by CashFly at CACHEFLY.com.
This is Twill, This Week in Law with Denise Howell and Evan Brown. Episode 203, recorded March 22nd, 2013. Power Hour Pounding. This episode of This Week in Law is brought to you by LegalZoom.com. LegalZoom is not a law firm, but provides self-help services at your direction, such as affordable business and personal documents you can trust. Visit LegalZoom.com and use offer code TWILL to receive $10 off at checkout. And by ShareFile. Enhance your workflow. Send files of almost any size easily and securely with ShareFile by Citrix. Try ShareFile today. For a 30-day free trial, go to sharefile.com, click the radio microphone, and enter TWILL. Hello, and welcome to This Week in Law. I'm Denise Howell, and we've got an amazing show for you here today because we're going to talk with Ali Spagnola, who has recently finished up a lawsuit over the Power Hour drinking game. So we're going to learn all about Power Hour and trademarks related to it in just a little bit here. Welcome, Ali, to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Wonderful to have you. We talked about your story a couple of weeks ago, and we're thrilled we could get you on to talk about it in more detail.
Yeah, I saw that. Thanks for the mention. I'm glad to be here.
You're most welcome. Also joining us once again is Rob Peguerero, writer about the internet, tech journalist extraordinaire. Hello, Rob.
It's good to be back.
Great to see you. And Evan Brown, of course, is back as well from Chicago, Illinois. Hello, Evan.
Hi, Denise. How's it going? Happy Friday. Hope everything's going well in your neck of the woods. Looking forward to our conversation.
Me too, very much so. Ali, let's start off with your story and start from square one, the beginning. First of all, tell us about yourself, what you do, and the entertainment that you provide to folks.
Yeah, sure. So I'm a musician, and one of my albums doubles as a drinking game known as a Power Hour. So I provide fun and directive drinking for your social engagement. And so my story starts when a guy sent me a cease and desist after having trademarked the term Power Hour, which is the name of this really well-known game. It's kind of like if someone trademarked poker and just said, like, no one can play poker anymore. And so that's what started me taking this gentleman to court.
Wonderful. Do you have any idea how long Power Hour has been around as a game?
I mean, like a really long time. It was a part of the research that my lawyer had to do, that it's, well in before the 2000s, although I believe he claimed first use around like 2001.
All right. So tell us about the person.
I never played it in college.
Yeah, I don't think I did either.
There's
Although
still
I'm
time.
sure yeah. Well, we do. I notice we all have a beverage of some kind. Unfortunately, I don't think any of them are beer, but for all of you out there who feel inclined to play Power Hour, which, Ali, correct me if I'm wrong, is taking a shot a minute for an hour, right?
That's correct.
So
and yeah, who said you can't put beer in a mug? Come on.
That's right.
Yeah.
So, for any of you inclined to play the Twill drinking game, where you drink at our favorite and often misused phrases on the show, just take a shot an hour this time around. Be careful, do it responsibly, but have yourself some fun. It's Friday. All right, so tell us about the fellow who trademarked Power Hour and what his side of this was.
What adds another interesting element to the story is that we were kind of business partners before he sent me that cease and desist. He had initially sent me emails saying that he liked my product and wanted to help me sell it and manufacture it. That never actually happened. And like 9 months after starting to work together, where I thought he was going to help me out, he ended up just doing a 180 and saying, your product sucks, and, stop performing your music and stop selling your album because it's infringing on my trademark. which is crazy because he was still selling it when he said that. So, yeah, he was granted the trademark, even though I fully believe he shouldn't have gotten it. And he went on a rampage telling everyone playing Power Hours that they had to stop and stop distributing them online, stop making them.
So you had an experience with the USPTO while the trademark was pending, correct? Didn't you try and block it?
Yeah, he made the stupid mistake of saying he had the trademark before he actually did. So I had this small window of opportunity to submit an opposition before it was given to him, which made, well, supposedly it was to make things easier on me. But it happened that he was inadvertently issued, even though he wasn't supposed to get it, and I got my opposition in on time. So he was given the trademark, and I mean, the trademark board even admitted that they had made an error, but there was nothing we could do about it. So I had to go into like full legal battle. Then after that, because he was given the trademark legally.
Evan, I remember a few years ago, actually several years ago now, I coined a word that relates to folks who blog in the legal realm. The word was blog, and I'm a little tiny bit embarrassed about it these days because it's such a silly word, but some people still use it, and it definitely defines what a legal weblog is. And I remember there was a time after folks started using the words that a couple of people started to try and use it commercially. Somebody wanted to put up a site where they would aggregate all the legal weblogs, and there were various commercial uses. And some people, started to talk about whether they were going to trademark it because they were using it commercially. And I remember going down that road of, gee, well, should I have trademarked it? It never even occurred to me, to trademark a noun that was in general use at that point. But it's the kind of thing that comes up repeatedly. Is there, a good lesson here for people doing business online about trademarks?
Well, I think there's always a lesson to be learned, and that lesson is to never forget what the real object of trademark law is, and that's to protect consumers, really, from a likelihood of confusion as to where certain goods and services come from. And operating in that framework, there's a defined set of things that are protectable as trademarks or service marks. We can just call them trademarks kind of interchangeably here. And then there's just ordinary language that everybody uses and belongs to our human heritage, and no single entity or person should have the right to claim exclusivity. So what you're talking about, Denise, when you coined the term blog, and it, for clarification, it's spelled BLAWG, being a legal blog, having the word law in the middle of it there. I mean, that's a word that just instantly, I would suggest, or I would submit that you would agree with this. I'm assuming you would agree with this, instantly kind of went into our collective lexicon. And yes, you, I think, inarguably are attributed with having come up with that word, but you didn't put it to a commercial use, providing goods and services, goods or services under that. So that's why it just went straight into our collective lexicon, our collective vocabulary, and it to that extent it becomes and became and still is nonsensical for a particular person to claim rights in it. The very same thing happens with Power Hour here. I mean, that's a concept that is in a lot of different contexts. There was a religious show, right, back in the 70s and 80s. Robert Schuller in Garden Grove, there, not too far from where you are, Denise. I think it was the Hour of Power.
Right.
Quite a bit different nature of services than what Ali is providing, and the game that maybe it's very similar. Maybe they both get you more spiritual, but certainly.
Well, actually, his trademark wouldn't have covered that. Actually, his was only about digital and like 1 minute. His DVD basically, but right. it ended up being all over internet and. But I don't believe it would have covered anything with the radio or those I think Kohl's has like a Power Hour, and there's also like a Power Hour radio show, that kind of thing.
Yeah, the Girl Scouts of America filed an application recently for something to do with Power Hour. So it's just a concept. It's an idea. It's a phraseology that belongs to us all. And so I find it absurd that anybody tried to claim any exclusivity for that very reason. It's just something that never is or was, or never was, and certainly now has no basis on which to give any individual a certain sense of exclusivity like that. So the lesson to be learned is don't forget what trademarks are, and don't try to claim things that are outside the scope of what they are.
Mm-hmm.
That's the lesson I see in this.
So, Allie, how did you decide you were going to fight this?
Well, I definitely went back and forth at the beginning and throughout all of it, still thinking like, what am I doing and why did I make this decision? But really what like tipped the scales for me was that another guy who was also running a Power Hour website, his name's Pete Berg, and he's running and still runs powerhourhq.com. And he had contacted me because he was also getting bullied by Steve, among a bunch of other people. But Pete specifically put the story on Reddit, and it got an amazing response. And so like that's how I knew that I shouldn't get pushed around by this bully, and I should, go for it and take him to court.
And did you feel off the bat like you had the resources to do that, or did you have to do some strategic planning at that point?
Yeah, well, I mean, I didn't really have the resources at the time, although the prediction was that the resources I would need were much lower than it ended up being. I spoke to my lawyer. Well, I got a lawyer, and then he suggested that it would be between like 5,000 and 15,000 at the highest if it got really bad. And so I ended up running like what you would call a Kickstarter, although Kickstarter rejected my idea because they don't support like raising money for legal funds. So I just ran it through my own website and collected donations, and ended up raising around $5,000, which was great and very helpful.
Mm-hmm.
So then I at least had those resources to start, attacking. Although once you get into it, I wasn't sure when it was going to end, so I couldn't give up.
So once you did get into it, tell us about the process. Was it very lengthy?
Yeah, it ended up taking 3 years, although like my part of the process was basically getting emails from my lawyer and trying to respond as quickly as possible so as to not use more of his time.
Mm-hmm.
It was a lot of waiting too.
You were the plaintiff, and how far you had a trial that you won? Is that how this resolved?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Great. So, yes, that can get really, really expensive to take something to trial. How was the discovery process for you?
I'm sorry, you just digitally cut out. I apologize.
Yeah, that happens sometimes. The discovery process, was that difficult, onerous, a pain?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It was difficult, onerous, and a butt pain
Yes.
because Steve wasn't responding for a while, which I thought would be good, but it ended up meaning that then my lawyer had to pull together more documents and do more work that I had to pay for. So basically, Steve was draining my account by not responding. So we had to send a motion to compel. And so finally, then he would respond at the last minute and just like extend things as long as he could to, stretch it out and, try and get me to give up.
And
Now,
the trial itself. Go ahead. Yeah.
I'm wondering, so reading your story, I thought, how many people ever go into this sort of thing? What was your prior interaction with the legal system at all?
Nothing. I mean, I had submitted for
That's
copyrights
amazing.
for my past CDs before, but that's it.
Wow.
How'd you find your lawyer?
My uncle was a lawyer. He had helped me like through the first couple weeks of it. And then he said, I can't handle this. You need someone professional that's into this trademark and copyright law. So he referred me to a friend.
Good. Well, it sounds like it was a good referral.
Yes, for sure.
When you got to trial, were there any sort of whiz bang moments that stand out in your mind?
I mean, it was all pretty darn boring and a whole lot of waiting. So
Mm-hmm.
I would not say whiz bang is something that describes what went on.
Yeah, I asked that question because I feared that you would say what you did. A lot of people, imagine that when you get into a courtroom, it's like the dramas you see on TV, and it's pretty far from that, wouldn't you say, Evan?
Well, and this is the Trademark Trial and Appeal Board, right? It wasn't like a real court.
Right. No, I had to testify, but that was just me sitting in a room with someone writing down every word I said, which is actually pretty scary.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, because with Trademark Trial and Appeal Board proceedings, it's all, there's no magical opportunities to walk into the courthouse and see the judge. I mean, these are all administrative law judges, and it sounds like what you're talking about was your discovery deposition, or maybe even and also your trial deposition as well. In a conference room, much like any old deposition in the ordinary thing. And it's pretty unusual for the Trademark Trial and Appeal Board to actually hold hearings where everybody has to show up. It was all just decided on the paper, right, Allie? No, you didn't have to go and testify and raise your hand, in like a courtroom or anything like that.
Right. No, I was really hoping for something like the musical Chicago, but that didn't work out.
Well, your video that you shot in the courtroom is quite wonderful. I guess you added the whiz bang that wasn't actually there.
Right. Exactly. That's my theater addition to it.
All right. Well, congratulations to you. Anybody else want to explore any other facets of this before we move on to our other stories, Rob?
The cultural aspect of it that struck me was the internet has this magical power where people lose all sight of what a complete jerk they look like. I guess this guy sounds like a lighter, less intense version of the guy who went after the oatmeal, where the worst lawyer in America just had complete lack of consciousness of what exactly his actions made him look like to pretty much everyone else on the internet.
Right. Aside from not coming out very well on the PR front, Allie, do you know if he has suffered, what's been the upshot for the defendant in your lawsuit since you won?
Yeah, well, I mean, when you Google him, you get stuff about me instead. So, I mean, that's a pretty hard hit, I think, as someone who cares a lot about search engine optimization. But he's also actually contacted me for the first time in 2 years via email, trying to pretend that he wasn't himself. I mean, it was basically an email from Steve Roos, and he said, "I'm a different Steve Roos. I'm a realtor. I'm not that Steve Roos, and I keep getting phone calls about this. People want to interview me, and it's driving me crazy. I just want to be left alone." But I mean, I can verify that it's the same person. He's just wishing that he wasn't him anymore.
Wow. All right. And you have another, you didn't use Kickstarter before, but you're on Indiegogo now. Tell us about that.
Yeah. So since the announcement, I'm trying to make something positive out of this crappy thing. So I'm looking to the future, and I would love to celebrate this victory with the nation and possibly the world. So I'm running this Indiegogo to raise money for my Freedom Victory Tour. And so far it's going really well. I'm over halfway. And it's been awesome to connect with people that are just as excited about this as I am.
That's great.
Toby Keith has nothing on you with that patriotism. Look at that.
Exactly. Well, you've raised over $20,000. That's quite incredible. And
thanks. Yeah, I'm really excited about it.
So you're going to go around the U.S. and possibly other places. What do you plan to do once you get there?
I will be playing my Power Hour concerts where I perform my 60 original 1-minute songs. And every time the song changes, the audience will all cheer together and drink their shot of beer. It's an interactive party.
Do you have the sequence of songs memorized, or do you have to use a playlist? Or I was curious about that.
Yeah, sometimes I'll screw up. I mean, 60 is a large number to remember. But no, usually when one song ends, and kind of have an idea of what's coming next. So yeah, I've been doing it long enough that I don't really cheat much anymore.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
And I imagine it's hard to remember toward the end if you're drinking along with the audience.
This is true. Although I keep my drinking to a minimum. I've never done a power hour where I perform and actually drink at all because I get exponentially less talented the more drunk I get, and I would like to finish the show.
Happens to the best of us.
But psychologically, of course, you feel like you're more talented.
Of course, right.
Oh, that's awesome. So you do these in clubs and other venues?
I'm sorry, I just heard other venues.
Where do you generally, when you do your Power Hour concert, what's your venue? Are you in a club generally?
Yeah, so I've played in dive bars standing on an egg crate, and I've a milk crate, and I've also played in big clubs, and I just played at the Theater Living Arts in Philadelphia, which was crazy cool because they had an awesome sound system. So I'm used to anything, even comedy clubs I'm down for.
So all of this reminds me a little bit of the saga that has gone on for years involving Bikram Choudhury and the people who practice hot yoga, and the fact that he's copyrighted his series of yoga postures and has enforced that copyright or threatened to enforce it and successfully threatened lots of folks. Did copyright ever come into this at all, Allie?
Only when Steve was using copyright interchangeably and incorrectly in his documents. That he claimed that there was something related to copyright in all of this, and it wasn't. But no, other than that, no.
All right, well, that's good. Any other questions on the Power Hour game and Allie's lawsuit before we move on, Evan?
Just a couple of observations. The order that came down from the Trademark Trial and Appeal Board sustaining Allie's objection is entertaining reading. Well, I use that term relatively. It's a boring legal document, but there's some good stuff in it. The board relied on evidence from Wikipedia and Urban Dictionary. I thought that was particularly intriguing. Because one of the essential issues was whether or not was it power? Yeah, power hour. It wasn't hour of power, right? Whether power hour is merely descriptive, and so deciding to evidence from there. And then I thought the other, I know that you made the argument also that the term is generic, which the board rejected that argument. It just held that Steve's application wasn't entitled to registration because the mark is merely descriptive. But it didn't buy your argument that it was generic. But it said the board said something pretty funny when it was talking about genericness. It sounds like you or your counsel argued that this is just like the game of chess. If somebody tried to trademark chess, that's a generic term and shouldn't be entitled to that. And the board, in rejecting that argument, said something pretty funny. I thought that, well, it's really not like that because in the game of a computer game for chess, it doesn't supply the essential ingredient, which is, the alcohol to do the drinking game. So it's different than chess in as much as you can't claim exclusivity like that. This is a little bit different. So the point is that the board's order says some pretty interesting things, and its evidentiary considerations were pretty entertaining, especially with Wikipedia and Urban Dictionary. So good stuff. Congratulations.
Thank you.
All right. Well, let's move. Well, first of all, I think we've got to make Power Hour our first MCLE password or passphrase for this episode of This Week in Law. And what that is if you are listening to the show for continuing legal education credit or credit in another field, and you need to demonstrate that you've actually watched the show, we drop a couple of phrases in intermittently that you can pull out and show, hey, yes, I can confirm I watched. So Power Hour is the first one. If you need more information about listening to the show for credit, head on over to the Twit Wiki, and all the details are there for you. So we'll do that. And then as long as we're drinking away and lowering our inhibitions, let's talk some porn. We haven't done that on the show for a while. What is it they say? The internet is 80% porn, 20% kittens. So for as long as
you don't combine those two, I think we're okay.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm sure someone has.
Well, that's the thing is internet porn is pretty much anything at all that you can imagine out there is there for the taking, and some countries are getting concerned about that. The European Union had a vote on March 12th where they would have cracked down on internet porn substantially, but there were widespread protests and concerns in the EU. And that part of this, I'm not sure what technically they call it in the EU, but whatever it was that they passed, took out this provision about internet porn. It was something aimed at leveling the playing field for women and making sure that things were not violent, et cetera, for women. So they took that out in response to lots of complaints, but clearly the concern was there about the negative impacts of easy access to internet porn. Similarly, Iceland is thinking of instituting a ban. Here in the U.S., there have been different efforts over the years to regulate and control, most of which have been unsuccessful. What we're left with is a system that requires a whole lot of record keeping on behalf of the folks that make adult entertainment. It requires public libraries to have filtering technologies in place. That was very controversial when it went into place, but it did. And that's pretty much it. You know, it's a free-for-all otherwise. And that's not necessarily a good thing if you're a parent wondering about, you know, how you're going to raise your children, and not necessarily a good thing, it turns out, from a health standpoint. Gary Wilson at TEDx in Glasgow has a video where he discusses some scientific findings and research that needs more development, but basically talks about the negative impacts on the brain and on overall health that internet porn can bring about, much like a bad drug. So the question then arises, you know, are we doing enough? Should we be doing more? Clearly, free speech and the right to have an uncensored web is very important to lots of people. But when we're talking about health issues, maybe it's time to rethink either the legal approach or the normative approach. Evan, what do you think?
Well, this is a tough one because I think we can, all sensible people can agree, and we'll leave it to the people on the fringe to disagree, that it's unequivocally a bad idea to try to regulate this stuff on a content basis. Now, set aside child pornography. There's no doubt that should be illegal. It is illegal, and there's no kind of First Amendment argument to make for the legality of child porn because its prohibition serves a compelling government interest. But when we're talking about ordinary porn that adults consume, I see no redeeming quality in trying to regulate its creation or distribution, because that is just, the moment you try to do that, you're being overly broad and you're violating the First Amendment. Those types of statutes and regulations and laws, under the U.S. law at least, are unconstitutional, and it's a bad idea. And we've got, you said there's been plenty of attempts over the years to try to regulate that. I mean, we would be accurate enough to say in the United States there have been attempts over the centuries to regulate obscene materials, pornography and stuff. I mean, going all the way back to the Comstock Act in the 1870s. That was the Ulysses S. Grant administration, where there was this law passed that was part of, an amendment to the Postal Act, or some kind of act, governing the post office, that made it a crime to distribute obscene materials through the mail. And I think in the 21st century, we're still suffering a hangover from the effects of the overregulation that went on there, because because of its overreaching, it had a lot of unintended and negative consequences, because the Comstock Act in particular, not only did it seek to regulate obscene materials, but it also got into issues of abortion and birth control, which really, the commingling of those notions is, even worse than just trying to violate the First Amendment in the first place by trying to overregulate that stuff. So I think what we've seen in modern society now, in reaction to the overreaching of the Comstock Act era, is this real sensitivity in regulating this stuff, which I am expressing. I think it's unequivocally a bad idea under First Amendment grounds to try to regulate this stuff by prohibiting the distribution of adult pornography. But I just have become aware of the science that you were talking about in that Gary Wilson or Gary Williams, I forget his name, that TEDx talk about the new science about the harmful effects of pornography, particularly on the male brain. And, this causes us to really consider, what we do as a society at a how we make good decisions about our culture, particularly about how, the decisions that men should make about how they live their lives. And so, I think what needs to be done is a careful consideration of the norms that regulate the individual and regulate the family. And this is something that really there needs to be some attention drawn, because this is an extremely difficult issue that I think it's wrong for the law to come in and regulate this stuff. But if this, the things that are afforded by broadband technology with the distribution of adult content like this, the negative effect. Something has got to be done, and I think it's at the level of the individual norm and the regulation of the family. So there's tons to unpack in that, but this is a pretty serious issue that we shouldn't sweep under the rug just by saying, oh, the law has no place in dealing with this.
Yeah, Gary Wilson is his name. So I have an anecdote for you that I shared with Evan before the show, and that is it points up the benefits of filtering, whether people agree that filters work or not, or are a good thing. I was pretty glad that Google has the safe search option on, I believe by default, because riding around in the car with a couple of 9-year-olds, both on their iPads, using a voice recognition tool to navigate around. So they're telling their iPad, go find me the SpongeBob video. One of them says, go find me Facebook. And what the voice recognition software heard was, go find me face sitting. And came back with this. I heard this from the front seat and immediately said, can I see that, please? Even though I'm driving at the time. And what came back was, Google image search with mostly, looked like folks who were fully clothed and engaging in some good rollicking fun, the kind of thing maybe after a power hour you might do once your inhibitions had been lowered. So it really wasn't, the boys thought it was hysterical, but I was quite glad that, they didn't see something a little bit more damaging for them at their age. And it made me think, too, that from a market standpoint, it would be nice, even though you don't want to, I think that a lot of the complaints about the EU proposal was that it would turn ISPs into the porn traffic cops. But I do think that there is a place for the ISPs to come in and do, what the cable company does with your parental controls on TV. It's not a perfect system, but you can check some boxes on your cable box. And if you don't want certain things to come on at certain hours of the day, they don't. And, it might be harder with the internet, but at least that would be some room for competitors in the ISP field to go ahead and offer something that might be helpful. Rob, where do you stand on all this?
Yeah, two thoughts. One, actually, you don't even need to wait for your ISP to do that. If you use OpenDNS, you can subscribe to the filtering option they use, and that's filtering you cannot get around as long as you're on your own internet connection, because it's right at the DNS server level. I guess, well, no, once your kids learn how to set their own alternate DNS servers, but I digress. But the other thing, it's funny, the EU, they seem they have this real penchant, I guess, for crazy internet regulations that have been tried before and don't work. Reading that story about the EU, I thought, are they not aware of the Communications Decency Act? We tried that in the United States. It didn't work very well. Everyone hated it. It would never have worked, and it was ruled unconstitutional on pretty straightforward grounds. But this is also, the EU. There are a lot of people there, I guess in Germany and France, who think Google should not have a right to do present any sort of snippet of the news story in a web search. So in the context of where that kind of bill gets taken seriously, I'm not totally surprised that they would decide we can just ban porn from the internet. That'll work.
Allie, what do you think?
I think it's entirely too much gray area. And listening to, Greg Wilson's talk, that it made me think like he's talking about on a click, things are novel and speedy content coming to you. Like it sounded like Reddit is terrible for you, and we should probably ban that too.
Right,
well, there's a lot of stuff online that'll make you dumb over time.
Well, but the difference between porn and this is what is addressed, is that really the closest comparison to porn would not be other stuff on the internet like Reddit or, any kind of content available on demand, but more like eating high-calorie foods. Porn, drives at the mating instinct of males. And in the old brain, you don't recognize the difference between a scantily clad, available appearing female on the screen. It don't distinguish between that and an actual available female, in Neanderthal times or whatever. So, that I hear what you're saying, that, oh, we're done for just because we have so much gratification of all sorts available. But porn seems to be a particular problem for the male brain, because evolutionarily, the male brain isn't equipped to handle that constant novelty, which its old brain can't distinguish between, an actual mating opportunity. So it does seem like, we'd be going too far to just, throw up our hands and say there's no reason to try to deal with this problem because technology affords us all these new opportunities. There really is a particularized concern here and a particularized danger because of the structural changes that occur in the brain, which are occasioned by the things that happen when the men do what it is that they do when they're looking at pornography. There are other activities associated with it, if you know what I mean. So it's a little bit different.
I mean, I guess I don't know if I agree with that. I mean, have they connected this sexual element to all the problems that they've seen with too much porn, right? So there's also the ADHD thing and the trouble concentrating and the depression. I mean, that seems like, it could be connected to just a too much content kind of thing. And I'm hesitant to say that it's directly because of that sexual element.
Right. Yeah. As we also saw in that video, there hasn't been any good science on this because you can't find a control group of, college age males who haven't experienced.
How sad is that? No way to find someone who hasn't seen the porn. There is a good article in the Daily Manitoban, which is the student newspaper of the University of Manitoba, by Jody Lane, taking on these issues from the women's rights feminist perspective, and discussing the fact that many feminists have been anti-porn in general, but that today there's a movement toward more inclusive, positive porn, where people, where people of different sexual orientations, different body types, different genders, different transgender status, you get the idea, are involved in not sort of the stereotypical porn video. She uses some terms in this story, which is in our discussion links at delicious.com/thisweekinlaw/203 that I've never even heard or seen before. So warning that some of this is a bit NSFW. But she also points out the Feminist Porn Awards have been around for something like 8 years now, that celebrate porn that's good for her. So, Evan, do you think that any of this might be the solution to sort of broaden the range of what's available and out there?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I don't study feminist perspectives. I respect them. I don't subscribe to most of them. So I'm not, really qualified, nor really should I, comment on it. But what I would say is, I would just back up from it a little bit and say that this really has nothing to do with establishing rules that one should impose on another, or even expectations that one person should impose on another. What I think is important is that everybody be aware of, what the availability of this content does, whether you be a woman seeking to enjoy it from a feminist perspective, or, just a dude doing what he does, looking for porn on the internet. I think there's just has to be an awareness, and that the responsible way that we as a culture and as a society are going to, let new technologies into our lives has to include, an awareness of all this and the ability to make good decisions at the individual level. And, without anybody trying to be too judgmental of the other, certainly without allowing anybody to regulate and oppress one another, which, like what we saw in the 19th century all the way up through, the later part of the third quarter of the 20th century. It took all the way up until I think it was the early 70s before the final contraceptive parts of the Comstock Act were declared unconstitutional. So, that's the great thing about the free society that we enjoy and that we live in, is that there can be all these perspectives and these different availabilities. But, I'm just preaching individual responsibility, individual awareness, and that has to be a real normative shift, and for us not to be too clouded by a fear of being overregulated or being too puritanical in any of these things.
Yeah, the other thing that I think about as a parent is just, it's almost like the same discussion you have to have with kids about using the internet in general. That there are always places and situations to be careful and aware of the consequences, and this would be one of them. That our children have to grow up in the real world, and they have to understand, that none of this is dangled out there for free for them without a price, and they have to understand what those prices are and who's benefiting when they spend their time in this way. Rob, you write a lot for consumers and about internet safety. Am I on the right track there?
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking about this in the other room, actually. Our 2.5-year-old is asleep on the other side of that wall. So if you hear any knocking, that means she woke up early from her nap, and it's a bad day for everyone. Yeah, we're all going to have to figure this out. I'm going to have to figure this out. Mm-hmm. And in the meantime, it was funny we mentioned food before, because I guess outside of New York City, that's not really a problem. I think you can solve so much with regulation, but with information. I would say people watching this, go check out the TEDx video. You can, in fact, watch it at work, I think, right? I didn't see anything too salacious.
Oh, yeah, no, that's very safe for work. Yeah.
Yeah. And, educate yourself.
Right. And the open DNS solution is a great one. And I certainly know tech savvy people who have implemented that. But I think, the run of the mill populace has no idea what that is or how to do it. I think my router
can do that too. And I forget exactly how you get to it. It's like 2 or 3 menus deep somewhere in the screen, but it's there. And at some point, maybe you'll need to try it out.
I would like to see something a bit more user-friendly available. And, unfortunately, that means that it's probably going to be fraught with being too broad and filtering things that you don't want filtered. And you're going to wind up complaining about whatever it is that gets implemented. But
your kids have to leave the house anyways.
They have to what?
They have to leave the house.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's why the solution has to be from either the bottom up or the inside out, however you want to talk about it, because no amount of regulation, whether it's coming from the parents or from the government, is going to, keep us from harm. The only hope in doing that is understanding information on the individual and what the choices that the individual makes in, utilizing technology to entertain oneself, what the consequences of those are.
I am somewhat heartened by the fact that the more I see of kids that are sort of preteens and teens that have grown up online, is that they're pretty savvy about all this stuff. If they start using the internet early and they're given these lessons early on, as far as things that could be hazardous for them, I think they get it. The ones I've seen at least do. I'm sure that there are tons of exceptions to that rule, but it does seem to me like they're growing up with a savviness that when you're on the internet, you're kind of out in the wild and woolly world, and that not everyone there has your best interests at heart, and that not everything there is healthy for you.
Yeah, I think kids, just like anybody, kids. Here I am, kids these days, younger. Yeah, right. I'm 38, full disclosure. So there's a good segment of the population that I consider kids, and they're actually adults. But I mean, I think that set, exhibits what I call, a sense of natural law, natural sense of right and wrong. I believe in that. And, and I think that human nature probably at its heart is good. You see a lot of people striving for good, trying to help others, make good decisions for themselves. It's just that technology is ahead of the way that our brains are wired to be able to handle this information. And it's not just technology and porn, but it's also with food. That it's a well-known fact. It's also in that Wilson video that an unbelievable number of people are overweight, and among that set, a number are obese. It's all just the availability that technology affords us. Distribution methods, high technology, or whatever, put us in a position where, despite our best efforts and despite our awareness, our consciousness of a natural order, natural law, the innate inbuilt sense of right and wrong, sometimes this stuff is irresistible, and therein lies the challenge of how to manage that tension.
We're all just headed for those chairs in WALL-E plugged in all the time, can't
Oh,
move.
geez. That's a great satire of this concept, for sure.
Yes. All right. Well, let's move on to things that are maybe a bit more uplifting. Before we do, I'd like to thank our first sponsor for this episode of This Week in Law, and that is LegalZoom. Now, a lot of people get in touch with us who watch the show when they have legal issues. And sometimes, it's great. Either we can help them out or we can send them to someone who can help them out. Oftentimes, I send them to LegalZoom. And if you're someone like Allie, for example, who is an entrepreneur going forward with a business, who has a legal issue come up, and of course, legal issues are going to come up for you all the time when you're doing business, the legal plan attorney option at LegalZoom is a great thing to have in place because you're paying just a small amount each month, and you have someone you can consult with. Get that first, not everyone has an uncle they can call up who can give them good legal advice and get them on their way. So if you need that first kind of, I've got this legal problem, what do I do next? The legal plan option at LegalZoom is a great way to go. And if you're looking to start a business, that's the kind of thing that LegalZoom is just perfect for. You can set up a business, form an LLC starting at just $99. You can form your business the right way. You'll save money on taxes and ensure your personal assets are legally protected. LegalZoom can help you with trademarks, probably not going before the Trademark Appeal Board, but if you need to register one, register a copyright, think about patents, non-disclosure agreements, all that stuff, great resources there at LegalZoom.com. If you have a family, you need to make sure they're protected. You can protect your family and assets with a LegalZoom will for just $69 or establish a living trust. If you don't have a will, you leave it up to the government to decide what happens with your family and assets. Not necessarily the best way to go. Over 2 million Americans have used LegalZoom for LLCs, wills, trusts, trademarks, and more over the last 12 years. Their online process guides you step by step, so it's easy to use. You get total customer support. And when you've got that particular question that a form just can't deal with, they've got this extensive network of attorneys through their legal plans that are available in most states. And when you're dealing with those, you can search through online profiles and unedited customer reviews to make sure you find the legal plan attorney who's going to be right for you and your business. So start your business and protect your family today at LegalZoom.com. LegalZoom is not a law firm. You can get self-help services at your specific direction, or you can speak to a legal plan attorney to get your questions answered and get ongoing advice. To receive a special thank you for using LegalZoom through Twit, make sure you enter the offer code TWIL, TWIL, in the referral box at checkout. You'll get $10 off. So go to LegalZoom.com, use the offer code TWIL. Thank you so much, LegalZoom, for your support of This Week in Law. All right, so we've pounded some beers. We've discussed another kind of pounding. Let's go on and look at some copyright stories because there's been a lot going on there too.
Did you really say that?
I guess I did.
Didn't you?
I think so. I mean, how are we not just going to make the world's worst puns given the subject matter of our show this far? All right, so in keeping with our pounding theme.
All I know is that at this point, the show has become anticlimactic. If we've talked about drinking and porn, where do we go from here? Yeah.
Where do we go from here? Well, we go to ISOHunt. There's finally been a decision from the Ninth Circuit. Back in 2009, ISOHunt was sued. This is a torrent site that was sued and got summary judgment entered against it. They appealed to the Ninth Circuit, which has decided to grokster them, basically. That the upshot of the decision is the management of ISOHunt was far too involved in the rampant infringement on their site, was using the fact that infringing material was available there to sell ads-based to advertisers. Very well aware of what was going on, red flags all over the place. And so the summary judgment will stand and the case will go back to the trial court to award damages against ISOHunt. So they got pounded too, Evan.
Yeah. I mean, that case was pretty factually specific. I mean, ISO Hunt was doing a lot of things that a lot of other, similar services do not do. Being so involved, so active with the type of content that it was inviting to be uploaded. So, factually, it comes as no surprise to me that the court grokstered him on this. And, it doesn't mean that it's the end of all file sharing or the end of all torrent activity or the end of all file lockers or what have you. But, bad facts sometimes warrant the correct decision from the court. So,
Right.
kind of a play on the bad facts make bad law. I don't think this is a situation like that. This is just a situation where it looks like the defendant was doing stuff it shouldn't have been doing. And, it should come as no surprise that it got pounded for that.
Right. One interesting twist in the case is their attempt to invoke the safe harbors of the DMCA and say, hey, we're just hands off. We're running a service here. We can't help what our users do. And that didn't work out for them in this case. They are going to ask for an en banc review of the Ninth Circuit. But as you say, Evan, the facts here are pretty bad.
Yep. It would take a lot to, it would take, I think, some magic and some, ex post manipulation of the past to, get the Ninth Circuit en banc to say something different. It's great when you say en banc. That's good. I love that. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's Latin, so if you're not drinking once a minute, you may feel free to drink now.
What you call a social.
Yes. Let's go from Latin to German. I'm not sure, Rob, we were wondering about the pronunciation. I don't know if I have it nailed yet, but the Kurtzsang case before the Supreme Court on the... Sorry?
That sounds close enough to me. I don't really speak Thai myself, so...
Oh, that's right. It's Thai. It's not German. It looks German, but it's Thai. Involving a Thai student in the U.S. who was importing scholastic books from Thailand, having friends there buy them and bring them in because they're cheaper there. And
it made like $100,000 from this business over however long he did it.
Right.
I heard it was 1.2 million, but maybe I'm wrong.
I'm in the wrong line of work.
Yeah,
Exactly.
seriously.
Well, in the wake of this decision, you could be in this line of work because the Supreme Court decided that it's absolutely okay under the first sale doctrine. It does not matter where you geographically obtain your lawfully produced works. As long as they are lawfully produced and not infringing, you can resell them here in the U.S., even if you got them in Thailand or anywhere else. And that is okay under the first sale doctrine. Evan, do you think this is controversial at all?
Well, you can kind of oscillate back and forth an individual can oscillate back and forth in his or her thinking about this because, it's good that, consumers can benefit, U.S. consumers can benefit by lower prices when it comes to being able to import foreign printed works into the United States because distributors may be more inclined to do that because this case says that it's not a copyright violation, Section 602 of the Copyright Act to do that. But there are some negative sides to it as well. I mean, and this is something that Justice Ginsburg observed in her dissent, is that this is going to cause people, it could perhaps take away, it could raise prices for U.S. works being printed and distributed in foreign markets. So, perhaps back in Thailand now are the distributors and the publishers going to have to raise prices because they don't want to be undersold in the U.S. market. You see what I'm saying? They'll sell them for more there so that it's more difficult to undersell those prices in the United States. Or probably what's more likely to happen is that the prices will go down in the U.S. market to be competitive to those. And that could be, accomplished by paradoxically sending more publishing overseas. U.S. copyright holders, the works that are being printed in the United States now, and by printed, I mean that term pretty broadly, but printed, produced, because we could take this into the high technology realm as well. Manufacturing, anything where a copyrighted work is embedded in the work. Paradoxically, that work could go overseas now. Because because we need to bring the prices in the U.S. down to match how they're being undersold from works sold in the United States. Now, that latter thing would have the effect of hurting the economy because fewer work to be done in the United States. Here I am sounding like a presidential candidate. That's going to hurt jobs. I feel like Joe Biden. That's going to, squeeze the middle class. I'm all about the middle class. It's going to hurt the middle class. Yeah. If we send all that work overseas to places like Thailand, so that we can match all these economic effects from this decision there. But, I'm no economist. I have no idea because, it just goes back. The circle could come full circle by saying, well, lower prices are better for the U.S. consumer, whether the products are being produced here in the United States or being produced overseas. There's that side of it as well. So it's not a simple. There's no simple consequence from this. It's good for libraries. That's one positive I didn't mention, because libraries now can acquire and lend foreign published works with more certainty. So if we're looking at the abstract notion of the dissemination of knowledge, that's a good thing that's fostered by this. But there are some economic consequences that make this anything but a clear, unequivocal good thing for us here in the United States and in our economy.
Well, there was a 6-3 split in the court, with Justice Breyer writing for the majority and Justice Ginsburg, who also authored the Eldred case back in the day, writing for the dissent. And some really interesting points were raised. First, to what you were discussing, Evan, that the whole economic, is this the way we want to impose restrictions on manufacturers in the U.S. and, is it good or bad to be able to discriminate geographically in your pricing? That really doesn't have anything to do with copyright. And that if we're going to, so that, if there is something to be done there, it's not to be done in this case or under the Copyright Act. The other thing I thought was really interesting, and this is more up your alley, Rob, was the discussion about other goods manufactured outside the U.S., not just books, but things like cars or electronics, anything that has copyrighted components within it that then gets imported to the U.S. The majority of the court was afraid that you wouldn't be able to resell your car if it had software in it and you couldn't establish that there was consent to bring the software into the U.S. and sell it here. So this is a good decision for tech. Yes, Rob?
Yeah, I like the ruling a lot because, first of all, it stays grounded in the constitutional mandate to promote the progress of science and the useful arts, not promote the economy per se, not ensure that creators get a fair return, just what's going to yield more creative output overall. And it's phrased such that they're trying to ward off this parade of horribles, that you can't sell your car or maybe your tablet, which is copyrighted material. This does allow for, what could be another bad scenario, which is Amazon no longer buys any books in the U.S. They buy everything overseas and destroy the U.S. publishing model. And the majority seems to decide that that's okay. That's somewhat of a political question, but in the meantime, there's a clear, longstanding common law tradition, right of first sale. You bought the thing, you can give it away, you can sell it. The copyright holder, they don't get a vote on it anymore. So I think that they were good to focus on that. The other thing that struck me in the dissent was this concern over what this ruling would do for the U.S. position in international trade negotiations, which is funny and accurate because, in fact, in a lot of these talks, the administration has said, we need to allow these sort of importation bans to preserve regional markets. But that's the thing. The negotiators who've been making that point are relying on law that was, in fact, not settled, that took a Supreme Court ruling to say, no, first sale doctrine trumps, any sort of importation restrictions. So the way this ruling undercuts U.S. credibility in trade talks is because the negotiators shouldn't have taken that position in the first place. Don't try to cement law into position when it's unsettled in treaties and international agreements that will then tie your hands later on. But I think Ginsburg sort of sees it the other way around, which is that the law should have reflected what the executive branch has been doing on the side.
So, Allie, what do you think? Would you like the ability to be able to sell your Power Hour CDs or music globally at a lower price than you do in the U.S.? And would you be sad if someone could import them and make a bunch of money?
Yeah, well, only personally, yes. I'm fine with other people, spreading my work as much as they can, even if they're making money off of it. But I can't speak for other musicians. And if you're going to put less restrictions on me, then I'm happy about that.
All right. Well, that's a good segue. Let's talk a bit about the DMCA and DRM in general. Allie, do you use it in any of your creative efforts? Do you lock things up or do you make them pretty open?
Right. So yeah, I don't use it, but again, like I'm only speaking personally, and it's hard for me to discuss this subject because I have a lot of content creator friends that like rely on the money that they're getting from digital sources, and that's part of the reason why I invented the shot glass USB to contain my digital content, so that there was a reason for someone to actually purchase the physical object once they had pirated online.
Good point.
Well, it's interesting because
go ahead.
In the music business, DRM has gone away. You don't ever see it except for on-demand services. Like I assume there's some level of DRM built into Rhapsody and Spotify that keeps you from just recording what you're listening to. It hasn't gone away in movies. In books, there are some cracks in it. The major publishers still want it. A lot of the indie publishers don't want it at all. And I think the sci-fi imprint of Macmillan, Tor Books, they decided to get out of the DRM business last year. So I think in the music business, we've shown that you can sell digital stuff without DRM. The world's not going to end. I personally buy more stuff if I know there's no digital locks on it. I don't have to worry about buying the wrong kind of computer or the wrong kind of phone 5 years down the line that can't play this song I purchased 5 years earlier. But books, I've bought so little stuff on the Kindle store because, there's that hang up. What if I decide I don't like Amazon software? Well, I'm kind of stuck.
Mm-hmm. Right. And the only real workaround for that is that Amazon has been good about making its app work on other platforms. But you're right, Rob, you're locked into their app at least.
One other thing I just discovered recently, or I guess somebody discovered a while back, I read it recently. Amazon introduced this web interface for Kindle books where you don't need to have the app installed, so you can use this on a Chromebook, for instance. And what's neat is apparently this HTML5 reader doesn't have DRM. It just pushes one chapter of text at a time, but there's nothing stopping you from doing whatever you want with it. So in that case as well, so you've actually gotten away from DRM even in a store ecosystem that otherwise requires it.
That's great. So you can copy and paste and...
Well, please don't. I mean, be nice to the authors.
Right.
But you can copy for fair use purposes, criticism and whatnot.
Yes.
Wink, wink.
Exactly. Educational purposes. People might not be aware that, and Rob, you mentioned that DVDs are definitely still in the DRM ecosystem. It's probably the most famous item still in the DRM ecosystem because of the copy protection that is there, and the fact that under the DMCA, it's actually illegal and punishable by a $500,000 fine or up to 5 years in jail to circumvent that copy control and to access that material and do things with it. So, Evan, there's this great article in The Atlantic about why that should change that you tweeted earlier this week. You want to tell us about that a bit more?
Yeah. I mean, if for those people who've been watching the show the last few episodes, I've found myself sounding like a cranky old man because I don't see what the big deal about DRM when it comes to unlocking phones is. That seems like a perfectly okay restriction for consumer benefits, so that cell phones, for example, can be reasonably priced in the marketplace because the manufacturers and the carriers can be assured of a certain guarantee of revenue that is enforceable by DRM protections on the phone. So I've been kind of like irritated with myself for sounding so cranky about not understanding why everybody is so up in arms about Section 1201, 1202 of the DMCA. So I'm trying to be a cool kid and get into it, why everybody's so uptight. And this is something I'm being facetious, by the way. So this is something that I can kind of hang my hat on. This article in The Atlantic, it came out on the 15th. The copyright rule we need to repeal if we want to preserve all our cultural heritage. And the author, Benj Edwards, who's got a great blog about vintage computer hardware and stuff. It's really interesting. You ought to take it out or check it out. He's talking about the anti-circumvention provisions and how those will have a negative effect on our cultural heritage and, the effect that DRM has on posterity. What future generations will find out about this period of time, going back and looking at the works that are or are not locked up with DRM. Kind of an interesting way of putting it is that it says, well, I forget where the quote of it here, but what it means is that those publishers of content now who lock their content up in DRM, it's really at their caprice how that content is going to be available. It's their caprices now. It's also certainly going to be in their caprices in the future about how this content is going to be available. And there was the quote that I picked out and tweeted. And again, I can't find it as I'm just scrolling through the article here. But the principle of it is that isn't it ironic that the future generation's impression of what is going on culturally and as a society in this period of history where DRM is prevalent, it's going to be biased or skewed toward the content of those works that are not DRM protected, because after all, those are the works that are going to be available for study in terms of our cultural history in the future. So this really gets me thinking about the problems that DRM provides, and accordingly the loosening of restrictions that there should be in terms of the anti-circumvention prohibitions in the DMCA here, because this actually matters, to the long term. I'm not saying that cell phone unlocking doesn't matter entirely, but this is a much bigger deal than whether or not you can unlock your cell phone, or even it's a much bigger deal, I think, than whether or not you can rip a portion of a DVD for fair use, because this has to do with posterity. This has to do with our cultural human heritage, and there's got to be some kind of a guarantee or some assurance to the future generations that they are able to really see what's going on here in the future. A point that hits home for me, and I know I'm kind of going on and on here, but my great uncle's widow just died in the last part of 2012. And one of the things that I acquired from her stuff was a collection of Reader's Digests from the 1930s all the way up through the 1980s. And, I just opened up a Reader's Digest from the 1940s, and I'm lost for I could be lost in there for hours. It's just so interesting to go and read the content that was there in that human perspective. This is cultural history, and it's a tangible way that I'm going back and looking at, mid-20th century culture by, the presence of this copyright protected work that has come into my possession. And I think of people, 100 years from now, if they were to, get a copy of my Kindle Fire, they may or may not be able to access the stuff and read the stuff and learn about the things that, influenced my thought and stuff like that, because it would be at the caprice of the DRM thing here. So that's kind of what's really kind of spurring my thinking on the real importance of DRM for our cultural heritage and cultural scholarship, and what future generations will think of us going back and studying. Fortunately, episodes of Twill are available DRM free. So maybe if people are going to judge their, develop an impression by this period of time by our show, maybe that's a great thing. So,
we may be judged harshly for that.
Yes.
That's right.
We think of ourselves as the Reader's Digest for our time.
No, that's the best they could do. All right. So anyway,
I know it was a sad time in human history. I agree, Evan, that this is one of the most problematic things that we confront. I'm a little curious. You were interviewed about something I hadn't heard of before called Stream Nation. That is a service that lets users upload movies and then invite one friend to quote unquote borrow the movie. How are they even on any kind of legal footing? I guess I'm not up to speed enough on how their technology works. I mean, if they're ripping DVDs or encouraging users to rip DVDs, that's game over right there, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. I'm a little worried about this enterprise. You can upload your content, or you can even send your DVDs to them, and they'll rip them for you and store them. And I guess they send them back to you. I'm not quite clear about that, but this has some problems. I mean, big content is going to be upset about this. I see where Stream Nation is coming from. Maybe they have a fair use argument. I was quoted in this piece by David Holmes about that. That maybe this is kind of like This could be acceptable space shifting, just like it was acceptable time shifting to record from television under the VCR. I mean, unfortunately, I wasn't misquoted, but some of the import of what I said was kind of mischaracterized when I was saying that in the piece that the Betamax case validated the business model of the VCR. I was not going so far to say is that the Supreme Court said it was okay to actually make copies of movies that you would rent from the video store and watch them later. I didn't go so far as to say that. What I was saying is it was okay to record off of television. So, it's a little bit it's a little bit tenuous, but if these guys are well funded and they have money to fight the content industry, maybe we'll get some new development of fair use when it comes to consuming content that you own already from the cloud. Maybe there's some factual nuance to this that is going to get us some different law that will facilitate this expansion of the opportunities that we have to consume our own content, because we can always revert back to the starting line position. Well, I bought it, I own it, I ought to be able to do whatever I want with it, right? So, we'll see.
Well, we'll go ahead and make DRM our second MCLE passphrase for this episode of This Week in Law. Rob, have you seen Stream Nation?
I am not familiar with that. It does strike me as funny because it's this intersection of, on the one hand, obviously it's okay if you want to loan your DVD to somebody. No one's going to mind. If you want to loan your CD. And even, in theory, if you want to put some MP3s you bought off Amazon, put them on a flash drive, maybe attached to a shot glass, give that to somebody else. That's okay as well. But with the DMCA, you have this wrinkle that it becomes magically illegal to break the encryption because it effectively controls access to copyright material. Now, I would love to see somebody bring a case saying, look, CSS, the encryption on DVDs, is a joke. It's been broken for like 15 years. Right on this computer, I have a bunch of DVDs. I wrote most recently one of the DVDs that our daughter loves to watch so much she just cracked it. So I'm very glad I ripped it.
By the way, FBI agents are on their FBI agents are on their way to your house.
Come and get me, Hollywood.
Yeah.
And that's the part that kind of drives people nuts. That because someone put this digital lock on something, then that extinguishes all their fair use rights. That's what animates the angst over people's cell phones, where also, you can save serious money if you don't have to pay your provider's roaming fee, and you can instead go to Europe, pick up, I've got a couple of prepaid SIMs right here, pop one of these into your phones. Suddenly you're no longer paying, $10 a megabyte of data. And people get angry when what they think of their customary rights as a customer have been taken away by this piece of software with magically endowed legal rights. Now, on the other hand, if you're sharing a DVD online with friends, it sort of looks bad. On the other hand, you could say, well, lots of people share account passwords all the time. Netflix users, how many people watch HBO Go on a friend or a relative's password? So, yeah, it's the whole effectively controls access thing all over again, just in a different way, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's one to watch. I think, when you read this article, I guess they were at the launch festival and making comments about, pushing the legal boundaries and innovating. But in this particular instance, I don't know if their pushing's going to work. Before we leave the copyright, go ahead.
Yeah, maybe you guys can fill me in better on this. Does this at all relate to what libraries are going through now with renting out ebooks? It seems like they maybe you guys have more insight, but I thought that they had to similarly only give it to one person at a time. And there's also an issue with physical books will degrade and you have to repurchase, where that doesn't happen with ebooks. Do you guys have more insight on that?
Yeah, different publishers have different arrangements with libraries, but the key issue is, subject to those prohibitions, which are technologically enforced with DRM. The question is, what are the rights that the libraries have to do that? And any overextension on the part of the content owners, or any over aggressiveness in terms of saying, library, you can only loan this out 24 times, whereas some other publishers will allow it 26 times. It's kind of like this fictional comparison to how long a real book would last if it were being loaned out. To the extent that's overly aggressive, then that DRM is doing us a disservice as an information society, and it's too much overreaching. So yeah, that certainly is an issue, and it takes different forms.
That's a great example. I know the Washington Post had a good piece about this several months ago, about how a lot of librarians in the DC area are annoyed because, in fact, they can only have 26 people or 25. Some mystically determined number can borrow an ebook at any one time. And that you can't really blame on the DRM. That's bad business models. I think in this case, where you have something that is loaned to you, you need to have DRM because in the real world, the barrier to your returning it is you'll get fined because they can tell you they don't have the book and you still do. But in that case, it's just DRM allowing someone to indulge their poor business judgment. Because when library books work, it's great. You're on your couch, you want to read something, you bring up the app on your iPad, select it, boom, it's there.
Hey,
Boom goes
Allie,
the dynamite.
I know we talked about how you don't have DRM on the CDs or the digital files that you distribute. On a slightly different copyright note, it seems to me the public performance issue would be a big one for you in that people would take your DVDs and then, have a party or maybe charge to get into a bar. And without having you there doing the live performance, they would either have the music or video of you walking them through the Power Hour without you actually getting the public performance royalties you would be entitled to under the Act. Is this something that's come up for you, and how do you look at that?
Do you get checks from ASCAP?
Yeah, right. So I'm registered with ASCAP, so hopefully they are looking after me for stuff like that. But I mean, like I said, at this point in my career, any more exposure that I can get is great. And maybe I'll change my tune when I'm at Metallica level and I'll go after Napster. But no, not right now.
Right.
You could probably sue a lot of fraternities and dorms, probably, couldn't you? Or the people there
They
playing
don't
it.
have any money, though.
Well, I guess they got mom and dad's money. Same, but I mean,
keg
they're
fund.
walking. I wonder if ASCAP is walking down the hallways of all the various
I
Greek
hope so. They better pay me in beer.
That's
there you go.
right. You mentioned you register your copyrights. Do you do any other like Creative Commons or any other licensing on your works?
Well, I've been getting a lot of flack actually for having patented my shot glass USB because people see it as counter to this whole 3-year battle that I went through. But I mean, really, it was at the advice of my lawyer. And, I'm creating a market for this object that did not exist before. And I feared someone like Steve Roos would come and step in on all the money and effort and time and marketing that I spent to create this market and just, undercut me. So, yes, I have patented my shot glass.
I heard what you did. You blamed it on your lawyer. That was pretty sharp. Well, it was just the advice of my lawyer.
Hey, what can you do?
She's a well-trained entrepreneur, Evan.
I see. If we could
She
all
knows.
have clients like that, that'd be awesome.
Yes, she knows the party line. All right. Well, before we get to some last stories of the day here, we're going to thank our second sponsor for this episode of This Week in Law, and that is ShareFile. Most business emails include some sort of attachment, documents, spreadsheets, PowerPoints, contracts. In the legal profession, we often need to share video around enormous batches of exhibits, things that are just too darn big to know that they're going to get there as an email attachment. We need it to get there, though. We need it to be received, to get into the right hands and remain confidential. It doesn't always, so that's why you need ShareFile. It's important to every business. ShareFile by Citrix sends your attachments as secure links, so you can send files of almost any size with the highest degree of security and receive notifications when your files have been opened and by who. So ShareFile is very easy to use. It integrates into any business. If you're an Outlook user, it makes it just as easy as you can imagine to send ShareFile files as part of your Outlook ecosystem. Plus, with ShareFile, you can access those files from anywhere once they've been shared on your laptop, your tablet, your smartphone. So it acts as a remote access platform as well. I highly recommend ShareFile. If you're not using it yet, you need to sign up for our free trial offer now. No credit card required, nothing to lose. You'll see why millions of professionals rely on it every day. So get started today with our special 30-day free trial. Go to sharefile.com, click on the microphone at the top of the homepage and enter TWIL, T-W-I-L. That's sharefile.com and type in TWIL. Thank you so much, ShareFile, for your support of This Week in Law. Let's end the day with some privacy notes. couple of quick things here. Another interesting thing you tweeted earlier this week, Evan, about Google Glass and two-party recording laws. If you're not familiar with those, many states have certain requirements in place, and it varies on a state-by-state basis as to if you're going to record somebody, you need to get their consent. You need to advise them that that's happening. Google Glass, although it's not in any of our hands yet, may wind up running afoul of that and various other privacy concerns. Folks in Washington are starting to pay attention to how the world is going to change when people are walking around wearing glasses that can potentially identify folks on the street, although I understand that facial recognition is not built in to Google Glass from the get-go here. But various other, it's just a means of technology that's a shade more intrusive than the cell phones that we're all becoming acclimated to. Evan, what do you think is going to happen when Google Glass bumps up against some of these two-party recording laws?
Well, people might get sued for this stuff, and I think that could very well happen. This would be a civil dispute where one person was recorded surreptitiously by this device, and it runs afoul of that state's two-party consent law. And there's the question of whether or not there's civil liability for the user, not for Google, but for the user in that situation. Google's probably on its good behavior because of the FTC order that kind of forces it to be on good behavior for the next 20 years, but that certainly in no way alters or affects what the user will decide to do with this technology. So it's easy to get alarmed about the potentialities that, or the abilities that Google Glass gives to the user to be surreptitious. From one perspective, we can think this is really not a new issue whatsoever. If you go back to the 1890 the right of privacy article by Warren and Brandeis, that part, a big, motivation behind that article was the new abilities that people had just by being able to take photographs on the street to surreptitiously gather information about somebody and publish that. That was one of the things that inspired Warren and Brandeis to talk about the right of privacy back in 1890, just, ordinary cameras. And so, one of the principles that arose out of that and has gone to inform privacy law in general is that, if somebody's surreptitiously taking a picture of you, the law of contract, they call it also the law of trust, kind of something a little bit different. They talked about the law of contract and the law of trust. That doesn't really provide a remedy for somebody aggrieved. The tort of invasion of privacy has to step in there and do something different. So from that perspective, there's nothing new under the sun. From another perspective, what we have here is Google Glass could really be a game changer, because I can't really think of any other technological innovation that so flagrantly says, broadcasts to the world, I have the ability to surreptitiously surveil you right now, and you may or may not know it. Surreptitious stuff now is like little spy cameras, like little cameras at the end of this pen and stuff like that. And you actually are being surreptitious. Google Glass might be a game changer because more people that we see walking around with them, we become accustomed to them walking around with them, and we assume that most of the time they're not surveilling us. But how do we then have our guard up for when they do surreptitiously take pictures of us? So in that sense, it could be a bit of I'm not going to call it a huge watershed, but a little watershed moment of the change in the way that we handle this stuff, because it's so overt in its ability to allow one person to record and gather information concerning his or her interactions with others. So, we'll see some disputes, we'll see some scuffles over this, and the law of privacy will continue to keep its general format, being under the auspices of tort law like this, and perhaps criminal law from time to time for violation of these statutes, in as much as that can be criminal. But we'll see it just get further refined as the technological innovations give us occasion to do that.
Rob, Jeff Jarvis thinks that the reaction to the privacy considerations regarding Google Glass are overblown, and that our normative behavior will deal with whatever strangeness this new technology brings with it, that maybe there will be a light on the glasses that alerts you when you're being recorded, and maybe just the fact that the person wearing the glasses will dorkily say, "Glass, start recording now," so that everyone around them
Once
is
you
aware
have the
of that.
glasses strapped on, you can't get much dorkier, I think.
Yeah.
I do like his idea. I mean, it's kind of weird that Google doesn't already have a little red or green LED. I mean, right now, the computer I'm looking at, here's the little green LED, which, as if the picture of me on the screen didn't prove it, tells me that the camera is, in fact, on and broadcasting.
Right.
You need something like that. Otherwise, the people will assume, you have your glasses on, so you must be streaming this somewhere. Where do I go watch it?
Right. Hey, Ali, this is not, necessarily a privacy concern for you, but more on the copyright front, as we were discussing before. Folks must record you all the time and put their videos up. Do you have an issue with that? Is that just all good for Ali?
Yeah, I was actually just speaking with some people about this before, and well, if you're taking like my content specifically from YouTube, I can actually, YouTube will tag it as mine, and I can make money off of your videos while you keep them up, which I found was interesting, and just learned about that. But in terms of like my live performances, yeah, that's like personally, I'm fine with it because it's more exposure. But I'm sure there are plenty of content creators out there that are not okay with that. But
Right.
if you're talking about Google Glass and putting a green light on it, like I put a piece of tape over it, I just hacked that. So I don't know if that's like a solution. Obviously, people have thought of that.
Right. All right. Well, one other privacy story, unless anyone else has anything on Glass they want to hash through before we move on.
Nah.
Nah.
Maybe we need to walk around with duct tape to put over the lens on the other person's
Yes.
glass.
Yeah,
Yes.
that works.
Pardon me
Well-
before I speak with you.
I mean, I see it going in the direction of just like there's a constant record of everything that ever was, and at some point that will be the norm, and we're going to go through this weird period where we have to figure that out. And I mean, obviously, I could be wrong, but I can't see it heading in any other way.
Ali, are you using then the Content ID system on YouTube, or did you just learn about it?
Currently not. No, I was like I just
Right.
found out about it. Yeah.
Yeah, let us know how that goes, will you? It'll be interesting to talk to an artist who's using that and follow up with us. Let us know if it's worthwhile for you.
For sure.
Okay, just one final little note is that Microsoft has joined the ranks of Twitter and Google in issuing a transparency report. So not too much to discuss there. It shows what countries are asking for what sort of data that Microsoft has handed over. U.S. is in second place after Turkey with 11,073 requests from the U.S. government for information about users from Microsoft. So first of all, we need a site, I think, to start aggregating, transparencyreportscentral.org or something so that we can start to compare and contrast this data really nicely. Rob, is this a good trend, you think?
Absolutely. I really like what Microsoft has done a lot. They are sort of following the lead of Google and Twitter. But I especially like that Microsoft, it was only a week or 2 weeks ago that Google for the first time said, this is the rough range of how many national security letters we got from the FBI, which the whole idea behind getting an NSL is you never ever talk about it. So getting the administration to say, okay, you can say you got between 0 and 1,000 is a big deal. And Microsoft did the same thing. What I'm hoping happens is we get some sort of competition because I want to know, where's Facebook's transparency report? What about Amazon's? What about Verizon, Sprint, T-Mobile, AT&T, Comcast? All these other companies that probably have a lot of interest from law enforcement. I want to know in the aggregate, how many of these queries do they get? And what are their standards? I mean, at a minimum, I also like it that, for instance, I think Comcast and Facebook, they posted the rules they use to answer these requests, which a lot of companies haven't even done that. I don't think everyone is all that curious, but putting this stuff out is the first step to maybe making people more curious about this.
Right. And it's certainly helpful for folks such as yourself who cover the technology industry. And maybe if individuals aren't paying attention to the specific data coming out from each company, they certainly would pay attention to your analysis of it.
Oh, I would be flattering.
Evan, any thoughts on this?
No, just to see that it's a good trend. The Microsoft's acquisition of Skype and its its efforts to bring Skype data under the tent and within the fold and within the scope of this reporting is interesting to see, because there's a lot of conclusions to be drawn about surveillance of Skype as well. So it's a good thing. And just it was interesting to see Turkey so actively seeking information. I would have expected it to have been another country, but the fact that it's Turkey, there's some story there going on.
Yeah, there is. Allie, any thoughts before we go ahead and close out the show?
No, not much from me.
All right. We've got a resource and tip of the week to give you. We're going to give you the tip first, and it comes from Rob Peguero. How to avoid Facebook scams. Kind of right in keeping with what we were discussing earlier, Rob, about being savvy about the way you're being manipulated online and steps that you can take to avoid falling into harmful traps. Why don't you tell us about user access tokens and how they can be used in scams on Facebook?
Yeah, this story is more about plain old social engineering than the exact mechanics of this web hack. This was a friend of mine on Facebook who, I guess some friend of this person had clicked on some bogus ad for 2 free Southwest airline tickets. Never mind the fact that, no one in the airline industry actually makes any money. So how can they afford to give away tickets to random people on Facebook? And this person had clicked on the ad as well, and that exploited there was some vulnerability somewhere either in her browser or in Facebook's code that would allow this particular app to get her rights and then spam a bunch of people on the site, myself included, with the exact same ad. And then inevitably somebody says, hey, you've just been hacked. Then is the apologetic, sorry. And then, so I wrote this to point out that A, this is how it can happen. B, because of the fact that Facebook has all this advanced web coding to try to keep you from having to log in all the time and, authorize every single action 2 times. And because it's a medium where you are you, not some other person. So if I, as the scammer, can get you to endorse my bogus offer, that's worth a lot more than having some anonymous email show up in your inbox. So it's a tempting target. Facebook has a tough job. And in the meanwhile, if you see something that looks funny, check it out. It takes 10 seconds to Google Southwest free tickets Facebook and see result after result saying, nope, not so.
So if something like this has happened to you, you should go to facebook.com/hacked.
Yes.
And they will give you some instructions on how to reset your password and further secure your account. Anything else?
Otherwise, skeptical computing is a good practice in general for keeping viruses off your PC, off your phone, and especially so on all these social media platforms where, why do companies spend so much time to legitimately get people to like their product or their service? Because that's really effective advertising. So of course, the market being what it is, the bad guys are trying to get it. They're going to try to get in on that as well. So it's a problem, and it's not going to go away.
All right. Well, our resource of the week is right in keeping with what we've been discussing, staying safe on Facebook and elsewhere. It's called the Digital Citizens Alliance at digitalcitizensalliance.org. They focus most on making sure that people don't fall prey to scams regarding counterfeit drugs. They focus on teens and keeping them safe, fakes, other online scams. They have a staying safe page that is a great resource, and also a blog that focuses on various current event kind of things and is full of good information. So I'm not too familiar with the site. I just stumbled on it myself, but it looks like they're doing interesting work over there, and it's a valuable resource. Check it out, Digital Citizens Alliance. All right, this has been a really fun show. When you can, we broke our rule about leading with porn, Evan, but I think if you can lead with a shot a minute for an hour, or in our case, since we go about 90 minutes, maybe we'll, instead of call it the power hour, we'll call it the nefarious 90.
I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, hopefully some of our audience is reaping the rewards of that.
Yeah,
Rob, what were you going to say?
I think did someone on the IRC chat point out that in college they had a century club, 100 shots in 100 minutes, 100 shots of beer, not booze.
I
You'd be
love that
in the
because
grave
it
at
makes
that
me
point,
seem responsible.
right?
That's right.
It's all
Well, I
relative.
loved, I'm not sure which of your entities this is, Allie, but over on Google Plus, when I was linking to you before the show, the corporate designation that came up was Binge Responsibly LLC.
Yeah, that's my company. It's
That's
funny
awesome.
to see the documents of Power Hour LLC versus Binge Responsibly LLC.
So there you go. It's the perfect meld of having fun and responsibility, as we try to do every week here on This Week in Law. This week has been really, really fun and informative. We thank our panel so much for sharing their thoughts and insights with us. We bring this show to you every week live at 11 o'clock Pacific time, 1800 UTC. If you go to twit.tv, you can watch us live every Friday. If you can't do that, you can find the show on iTunes, on YouTube, on your Roku box. Definitely, we're going to be there for you however you want to enjoy us, whether live or after the fact. If you do enjoy us on iTunes, we'd love it if you'd rate the show, whether you listen to the audio or the video. That's always fun for us to see your feedback and your ratings, and let us know if you've been liking what you've been seeing and hearing here on This Week in Law. As I said, our discussion points, if you want to look back at anything we talked about on the show, this weekend, delicious.com/thisweekinlaw/203 is our episode today. And Rob Peguero, great chatting with you again.
Thank you. It's great to be back.
Anything final you want to plug, leave our listeners with before we go?
Well, you can look me up on usatoday.com. I forget what this weekend's column is about, but I think it involves social media in some way. I blog about tech policy at the Disruptive Competition Project, which is project-disco.org. You can find me on Discovery News and look me up on Twitter.
I'm sure folks will do that. And Allie, I just can't tell you how much it's been a great time to have you on the show. I know the IRC's been lighting up the entire time. We've really appreciated your coming on and talking about all our topics and your case.
Yeah, it was great talking to you guys. Thanks for having me.
Our very great pleasure. And when's your next performance going to be?
So I'm scheduling my tour after my Indiegogo finishes. So we will know after that. It's about 19 days from now. So if you could go help me out, that would be great.
That would be great. I did. I hope other people will too. We'd love to see you tour the nation, Allie, and spread the joy of the Power Hour. Evan, so great to talk drinking and porn with you today.
Hey, yeah, I've enjoyed it. I mean, you can't tell from my mannerisms and my speech and my overall disposition that I'm totally wasted right now because I've been drinking for 100 and so many minutes. But yeah, it's been a lot of fun. I've really enjoyed our conversation. Allie, loved hearing your story and talking with you about it. It's really funny. Really, great that. You did what you did, being assertive with those, or making sure that people weren't in too much, acting too crazy with their rights. So very fun. And Rob, great to talk to you again. Always a fun and great conversation. And really enjoyed it. Great to be here.
You may think we can't tell, but we can totally tell.
Yeah.
So just bear that in mind.
Starting to slur and everything else. I'm overserved.
That's right. Well, seeing as how we're sliding into the weekend, that can't be too bad a thing. We hope you enjoy your weekend and that you join us next week on This Week in Law. Take care.